Hello everybody, and welcome to the Wednesday edition of Video Clips. I want to talk about schools today. Some governors are working on opening schools in the fall with ridiculous rules, as you've heard about. Others are claiming that the schools need to remain closed until a vaccine is ready. The fact that school openings are still being debated is somewhat unbelievable based on what's happened in the few short weeks since American kids were sent home. The data are clear. Our kids are being harmed due to closed schools. According to an article in the New York Times, by September of this year, most students will have fallen behind, with some of them having lost the equivalent of an entire school year of academic progress. Racial and socioeconomic disparities will be worse due to the fact that a lot of kids didn't have access to computers or internet or much instruction at all from teachers. Some schools are indicating that they'll open, but with kids spending part of the day at school and then part of the day at home. This will make things worse, and internet access isn't going to get any better between now and the fall. And parents who aren't equipped to help their kids, they're not going to be any better equipped in the fall to do this. So, and many of these parents have to work, which means we're going to have kids unsupervised at home for long periods of time, and that's really not much of a plan either. Clint Silva is a 7th grade social studies teacher in Aurora, Colorado, who says the majority of his students have not consistently worked on assignments while at home. Parents work, they're not tech savvy, they lack the skills to help their kids learn, and says that, quote, "We know this isn't a good way to teach." He reports that he logs on every day for an hour and the kids turn off their cameras and they're not talking to teachers. I mean, over time, the participation has dwindled. An analysis of 800,000 students conducted by researchers at Brown and Harvard universities determined that student progress in math decreased by about half in poor zip codes, about a third in average or middle income zip codes. Kids in high income zip codes, not surprisingly, were kind of immune to all of this. They estimate that the average student will fall behind by 7 months, 9 months for Latinos and 10 months for Black children in math. The hardest hit may be the rural areas, where only 27% of schools in these particular areas required any instruction at all while the schools were closed. So the fact that we're debating about school opening, or not, is nonsense. And Scott Atlas, he's a physician and senior fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution, and Paul Peterson, professor of government and director of the program on education policy and governance at Harvard University and a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, agree. They wrote an opinion piece which was published in The Hill. They cite CDC data showing that the first 69,980 deaths that were recorded for COVID-19, 12 were children under the age of 14, less than 0.02%. The CDC reports that only 10 of the COVID-19 deaths in New York City were adolescents under age 18. This is the same fatality rate reported by Spain, by the way, and France reports an even lower death rate for teenagers at 0.001%. While acknowledging that the deaths of all children, any child, are tragic, approximately 600 children died from seasonal flu during the 2017-18 season, while this year's COVID's deaths total 12. Now, it's tragic that 12 children died, but this is clearly a whole lot less lethal than seasonal flu. Kawasaki disease was recently associated with COVID-19 in children. I have my own suspicions about this, mainly because of the timing. As soon as we started talking about opening schools, a disease that really didn't affect children, suddenly we've got a reason to be concerned. But what you should know is that the association is low, and Kawasaki disease is rare. It affects maybe 3,000 to 5,000 children per year, and it's highly recoverable. Children don't die from it, generally speaking. Atlas and Peterson write that the collateral damage from school closing has been significant. For example, in Boston, only half of students are showing up for online instruction in any given day. 20% of them have never logged into the designated website. Quote, "This situation is going to be like what is often called the summer slide in student achievement, but on steroids," says Virginia's state school superintendent. Low-income students are suffering the most, as you might imagine. Wi-Fi, computer tablets, software. I mean, wealthier kids have these things, but not necessarily kids in poorer districts. The wealthier kids are also more likely to have a parent who's educated at home to help. Robin Lake at the Center for Reinventing Public Education says that elementary students in urban districts may have lost 30% of their reading skills. That's very significant. Closure will endanger the health of our children, these authors say too. Schools are the place where many kids learn they need glasses or a hearing aid, or if they're seriously ill, are guided to a school nurse or the doctor's office for medical attention. Last but not least, children are missing opportunities for social and emotional development that come with play and exercise and sports and socialization. Reports already indicate that suicide rates are increasing in children. So this idea of going back to school, sitting 6 feet apart with a mask on and no recess, I mean, it's ridiculous the harm that this is going to do to kids. Now, one question that the authors bring up is adults, teachers, guidance counselors, bus drivers, and kitchen staff. I mean, nobody wants to endanger the health of adults, but the adults in school are a lot less safer than they are in the grocery stores and Walmart and all the other places where they're hanging out. I mean, I hate to tell you this, folks, but Walmart and Kroger are not exempt from spread of the virus, and people are cheek to cheek in those places too. As is shown around the world, including Switzerland, Canada, the Netherlands, France, Iceland, the UK, Australia, and now Ireland, children seldom, if ever, transmit the disease to adults, even to their parents. It's important to remember that COVID-19 targets mostly elderly and those with underlying conditions. For people under 60, COVID-19 fatality rates are so low that they're actually less than the seasonal flu in most calculations. And that's according to data from France, Spain, and the Netherlands, as well as the Centers for Disease Control. They downgraded their death rate by quite a bit, as I reported last week. Certainly adults at high risk or who are fearful should take precautions, and by now they know how to social distance for their own protection. But teaching is a young person's occupation. The median age of teachers in the United States is 41. More than 80% are under the age of 55, the age at which most become eligible for a retirement pension. Atlas and Peterson take issue with the opening plans under consideration. I've talked about this a lot, such as that students should attend half days, wear masks, skip recess, spread themselves 6 feet apart, and spend half their time in front of a computer, all in the name of social distancing. But how can classrooms keep people apart, these kids apart by 6 feet? How can you practice phonics with your mouths covered? How can you learn if it's time to return home just as soon as you sit your body in a seat? How can you develop socially and emotionally if you can't be around people? I mean, how do you explain to a 6-year-old you're not allowed to be next to the kid sitting next to you? And how can teachers instruct with masks on their face? All of this borders on the absurd when we know that social distancing and face coverings for children are completely unnecessary. They finish by saying, never have schools subjected children to such an unhealthy, uncomfortable, and anti-educational environment. So we do not know the total harm that it's going to cause. But science does tell us that risks from COVID-19 are too minimal to sacrifice the educational, social, emotional, and physical well-being, to say nothing of the very health of our young people. And that's where I just wonder at the people who are coming up with these ridiculous plans. You must hate children. Nobody would subject children to what I just described. Now, Denmark was the first country in Europe to send kids back to daycare and schools, and doing so didn't result in an increase in COVID-19 cases. The same thing happened in Finland, completely uneventful. It seems that there's considerable evidence showing that closing schools in the first place may not have been a very good idea. There's quite a bit of information in medical journals about it, actually. Here's an excerpt or a couple of things from an article that appeared in the Journal of the American Medical Association. On the effectiveness of school closure during the COVID-19 epidemic, the poor relevance of this restrictive measure seems confirmed by the evidence that in Taiwan, the spread of COVID-19 was minimized without widespread planned school closures. In China, it was found that school closure for 2 months was not significantly effective for disease prevention, mainly because of the very low incidence of symptomatic disease among school-aged children. It is even possible, this JAMA article says, that school closure may have negative effects and lead to greater medical, economic, and social problems. While the efficacy of school closure is debatable, the potential negative consequences of this measure cannot be ignored, the authors go on to say. Some consequences regard the family. To take care of the youngest children when daycares and schools are closed, parents must remain at home with inevitable economic consequences. In addition, when parents are healthcare workers, this can have relevant medical effects. In the U.S., it's been calculated that the absence from work of 15% of healthcare workers may be associated with a significant increase in COVID-19 mortality. If parents must work and grandparents must become the primary caretakers of children, the risk significantly increases that these persons who are at risk by virtue of their age may become infected, and this is what happened in Italy in the first 2 weeks when school closure was decided, but other work activities were not stopped. Moreover, school closure can cause risks of deepening social, economic, and health inequities, particularly in limited income countries. In countries where the Ebola epidemic took place in 2014 through 2016, school closure was associated with increased child labor, violence, and socioeconomic problems. An article in The Lancet says, our model estimates that the infection mortality of COVID-19 increases from 2% to 2.35% when the healthcare workforce declines by 15%. School closures could lead to a greater number of deaths than they prevent. Now, that's not the death rate for COVID, but they're saying that the death rate increases by that amount when healthcare workers can't go to work. We feel more and more confident about not closing schools, and Anders Tegnell, Sweden's top infectious disease expert, says. It's not something that really is going to be effective for this kind of disease. Schools don't seem to be very much of a motor of this epidemic. So, all of this that I'm telling you makes the latest suggestion on how to open schools just seem insane. Right here in Columbus, the New Albany School District, one of the wealthiest and supposedly the best in Central Ohio, is planning to require each student to wear an electronic device that will track their location throughout the school day. The device will report where the students sit in class, who they meet and talk to, and also how they meet in groups. This is all to prevent a spike in cases since we're now in the midst of a fake pandemic. Superintendent Michael Sawyers thinks this is a great idea. He says, we're very much interested in the automated tracking of students. He believes that the technology could help the school determine whether social distancing is being observed and help quickly identify students who may have been exposed if someone tests positive for the coronavirus. The school system is also considering other measures like regular temperature checks and strict enforcement of social distancing. Many companies have developed technology like this, and a lot of schools and universities are considering it. No wonder almost 40% of parents are thinking of homeschooling. Who would want to expose a child or adolescent to this dystopian nightmare? In addition to being intrusive, one of my biggest objections to it is it programs kids to think that letting the government and the school and other people electronically track what you're doing and who you're talking to, it culturalizes kids to think that this is okay. And it's not okay. I got news for you. I am not letting anybody put a bracelet or a tattoo or anything else on me to track my activities and keep track of who I talk to, how close I stand to somebody, and what my temperature is at any given moment in time. Parents should keep their children home until schools drop this nonsense. We could end this nonsense if 40% of parents really got serious and didn't send their kids back to school, because the schools many of these buildings couldn't stay open with a 40% loss of income, and that's exactly of students, which results in a loss of income, and that's exactly what needs to happen. So many reasons to keep kids at home. I'll give you another one. If you live in a state where vaccines are mandated, well, keep them home and you don't have to worry about enrollment in schools and mandated vaccines and that sort of thing. So anyway, the bottom line is it is harmful to keep children out of school. It is harmful to send children to school to wear some type of monitoring device and wear masks and sit 6 feet apart and not have recess and not have lunch and spend 2 hours at home and 2 hours at the school. That is harmful. And we don't have to choose between two ridiculous options. Here's another option. Homeschool your children. We're planning to set up some resources to help you and make this not so scary to do. And there are all kinds of parent co-ops that get together and work on this so that parents don't feel so overwhelmed by the whole thing. But everybody has to decide what they're going to do. But no kid of mine would ever would have some monitoring device put on them at school. Never. I would never want to have a little child think that there's anything normal about that. All right, pass this on to anybody who you think would benefit from watching it, and I will be back to you tomorrow with more news.